My name is Chi Brown. I'm here with Considered Culture. I am a conservative, libertarian, conservatarian. So I'm just trying to get into how I got to where I am because I wasn't always the person that I am now. I was very liberal. I ran in the streets a little bit, just a little bit, as a teenager. But I'm not going to get into my personal stuff right now. I want to figure out why, because I get into debates on Facebook, debates all over the internet, and I've been doing that for years, since the MySpace days. There's been this huge shift towards victimhood. I think there always has been people who've kind of celebrated their victim status in America. Certainly for the black community, we tend to talk about our history a lot. Everything is mired in history. You know, everything is about the past and what we did in the past and how we got to where we are today, and how the past influences our problems here now. But in doing so, I think a lot of us are trying to be the heavyweight champions, if you will, of victimhood. And I don't think that's a healthy way to be. I think many of us will sit here and fight with one another about, and a couple of years ago, before we have all these victim groups coming together and forming like Voltron, and black people just happen to be the head, we had arguments and debates about, you know, whether the gay rights movement was a civil rights movement. I mean, I heard black people just going on and on ad nauseum about how gays are not like us, their struggle is nothing like ours. They didn't want to be compared to the struggles to be compared. So I've heard this in New York, living in New York City. I can recall getting on the subway and seeing a debate between a Jewish person and a Muslim, a black Muslim, and they're sitting there arguing about who had it worse, the level of performance of black folks in America today, because we seem to be behind so many other groups. It's logical and it's understandable to say to other folks, well, hey, that's because of all this victimhood. However, I want to go back to the high school scenario, the your middle school scenario, or whatever school, just grade school in general. When you're growing up, there was always a bully. You know, all of us can probably point to a bully that we've dealt with, or we may have been that bully. But when you look back at those things, you know, I recently went to a get together. It was on kind of like a class reunion. All the people who graduated my class, and this kid who was tormented and bullied came in a Ferrari. Now, my thought was, you know, he never complained about being bullied. You never heard him compare notes with other bullied kids to say, hey, I was bullied worse, so that explains why I'm not doing well in school or whatever. No, he got straight A's. He focused, he buckled down on his work, he got straight A's, and now he runs some company in medicine, and is doing very well for himself. And the funny thing is, one of his bullies happened to come to that same event and was floored when this gentleman came in the Ferrari, and he actually even said something to the effect of, you know, if I'd have known you'd be who you are today, I'd have never bullied you back then. And I think that's the perfect way to be if you're in terms of being a victim. If the level of attack is so severe that it prevents you from reaching success, then of course something should be done about it, and I think none of us would argue that point. But what we have today are people who are using victimhood as a reason for not reaching certain levels, and I don't think that's realistic in today's society. I think in today's society, most of us have the opportunities available to us to do whatever we'd like to do. The problem with focusing on victimhood, I think, is that it will hold many of us back if it's ingrained in our minds from such an early state, such an early time in our lives. You know, we learn about slavery in grade school. February is all focused on all of these horrible events that happen to black folks, and a lot of times I don't think we celebrate our victories as much as we need to. The victories should be celebrated. Now this brings me back to my original point, which is basically why I left the left and moved towards the right. I think that as somebody who was a liberal, as somebody who eats dinner with my whole family is of the left, there are certain things that are different. The messaging is different. I am somebody who is very much a skeptic, somebody who needs facts. I need evidence, hardcore empirical data to form my beliefs, or to form my positions on things. And what I began to notice as a liberal person, and you know, I have all these books here. I have lots of books, and as a kid I always read. Growing up, I've always been someone who liked to read. Doing those things, I read a lot of books by folks on the left, and at some point I began to understand that a lot of the things that they were saying were catering to my feelings. You know, they're playing this role of the victim, or being a victim, has a lot to do with feelings today. Again, there aren't things that we can say are holding people back in this day and age. I mean, some may argue that there are, but you'd be hard pressed to be able to show that with evidence and data, that there are things that are actually preventing people from being successful. There are hurdles, no doubt, but are there any hurdles that can absolutely prevent people from performing, prevent people from excellence, prevent people from becoming a success in life? And I just don't see it. I don't think they're there. I think that a lot of this stuff is psychological, and that psychological blockade comes from us celebrating this victim status for so long. And that is my problem mainly with the left, is the celebration of victimhood. It's an awkward thing to see people arguing to be at the top of the heap of victimhood. Oppression Olympics. So who's the most oppressed group, and why? Just think about this for a minute in a psychological term, in a psychological manner. Who in their right mind wants to be at the top of a victim? Even the kid I was talking about, he never wanted to be the number one bullied kid in the school, and he certainly wasn't going to argue that point, right? Why, as a group in this sort of tribalistic society, are we arguing that we have had it the worst in America? People will sit and argue with you online that, oh, this version of slavery was worse than this version of slavery over here. We've had it the worst. Black people will go on and on and on about having had it the worst. I sincerely believe that this is something that has to do with not being where we'd like to be today, and that does something psychologically. It feels bad to be on the bottom. This is the problem with thinking in terms of groups. You know, grouping yourself, identity politics rather. So this is the problem. The biggest problem with identity politics is you don't look at yourself as an individual. Again, this is why I left the left, because they're so concerned with identity politics that they don't concern themselves with the individual as much. So for me as an individual, if I've reached a level of success, it's not enough. When I was in college, I went to school for journalism, and one of my jobs during school was to report for a local newspaper. Uh, One of those stories, I went out and I went into the hood, and I was reporting on uh, neighborhood gardens, community gardens, right? And there's a black woman, and she had a very nice backyard in the hood. So I guess some white folks from outside of the community came in and asked her if she'd be willing to allow them to come into this community garden, build a community garden in her backyard. She agreed. What struck me is what she said about her level of activism in terms of local politics. She would go to the political meetings in the city hall and things like that, town hall meetings and that sort of thing, meetings with the mayor or whoever, where they discuss community issues. And she said, you know, I go to these community issues meetings all the time, and the people that come to speak about my neighborhood don't live in my neighborhood. And that was very striking to me, because when I look on television, when I look on these liberal news media outlets, and I see these extraordinarily successful black folks talking about the hood, the folks from the hood, the folks who have not been successful, it's a little bit, it irritates me, because they're speaking for people who are supposedly the voiceless, but they're not letting these voiceless folks in front of the camera. They're not putting them in front of the camera and letting them talk about their issues. When I see, you know, that single mother who's had an issue with her son, if something terrible happens to her son, or you know, her son's robbed or something like that happens, and you see these people on these videos that go viral, not very often, but when you do see these videos of these mothers, they sound exactly like conservatives. We need more police. We need them to come in here and do something about these criminals. These criminals are out of control in my neighborhood. I want these boys out of here because they hurt my baby, or whatever the case may be. They start to sound like conservatives. And some of the folks who have done studies and who've actually decided to go into the community and ask community people what they feel, find that a lot of the community welcomes the police there. The folks who are good law-abiding citizens, they want the police there. There's no, I don't want the police here. I mean, the police are usually at odds with criminals, not with law-abiding citizens, and they come there because the law-abiding citizens are asking them to be there. From my perspective, and I think from a lot of people's perspectives, the Democrats, the left, have been selling black people on their victimhood. It's we're your white saviors, we're here to help you. You're not smart enough to go get an ID, so we're going to put voter ID laws because we don't think you're able. I mean, this just sounds ridiculous. This is by definition racism, because the definition of racism says that you think you're superior to someone else. Now, if somebody's telling you that they think that your people can't get an ID because we don't have enough money, we can't find our way to the DMV. I mean, I don't know what they think, but that seems pretty racist to me. You're basically saying we can and you can't. When you look at affirmative action and what it does to our community, folks are always questioned. Did this person get here by merit, or did they let him in because of the color of their skin? You have folks. There's just an Indian gentleman who basically played like he was black. He was dark skinned, so he shaved his head because his hair, of course, was straight. He shaved his head and pretended to be a black man so he'd get into medical school, and got in, knowing he wouldn't have gotten in as a Asian. So we got all kinds of things there's problems with that, and again, it goes back to they think lesser of us, so they need to do all kinds of things to help us out. I don't want that. To me, that's evil. It's like you are saying that I'm lesser than you, and I don't want to be lesser. I want to be able to compete. Welfare, the handouts, the welfare, I think, is what has really taken our community and really thrown it under a bus. You know, single parent homes are the fatherless homes rather are the greatest predictor of whether someone will be successful or not, whether they'll go to prison or not, whether they'll engage in criminal behaviors or not. That is the biggest, the single most predictor of all of those things. It's the easiest way to predict those things, right? The black family was, for the most part, intact up until much of these policies were put in place. It has hurt us the most. I'm convinced, based on the data, based on looking at the information, that is the single most and biggest issue that we have in our community. Again, this is not something that the left cares about. At some point, I start to think that perhaps because we're a strong voting bloc, we vote 90%. Most of us, over 90% of us, vote for the left, for the Democrats. Well, their whole platform and how they get us to vote for them is, you need our help, and you have to be so there's an incentive for them to have us be victims. Why nobody's thought about this is beyond me, but there's incentive to be a victim. If you're on the left, there's an incentive for black folks to be victims. The other thing is, if you look at these Democratic run cities, right, you look at them, all of the most high crime areas, where we have high rates of fatherless homes, they're all in large Democrat cities, run by Democrats for many, many years. The Baltimores, the Chicagos, the Detroits, run by Democrats for a long time. The problem with the right is that they're not focused on people's feelings. You know, you're focused on the facts. They're not. The arguments aren't made on a moral basis. So this is what I charge you all with. If you're black, if you are on the left, I charge you. I just ask yourself some serious questions. Do some soul searching. Listen to Malcolm X. Even Malcolm X talked about this in one of his speeches. The Democrats need us. Without us, they would not win. So what have they been selling you? What ideas have they been selling you? What is their message to the black community? If that message is that you're a victim, and we've been voting for them for many, many years, and we're still a victim. Even when they ran things, when they ran everything, nothing changed. The question is, why do we still continue to put all our support behind them? I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. And don't you see that there's some incentive, that they may have some sort of incentive to keep us as victims? To keep you thinking as a victim? I mean, that's their whole platform right now, is identity politics. If it's not black victimhood, it's the LGBTQ victim status. It's women who are as victims, and they show you all this stuff that caters to your feelings. You're feeling lesser, and they don't think about or celebrate the many successes that we've had, the many successes that women have had, the many successes that gays and the LGBTQ community have had. There are lots of successes for all of those people, and there's many things to celebrate. And unfortunately, the focus isn't there. The focus is on racism. Everybody's a racist. White supremacy is overrun these days, which the actual data does not bear that out. It also actually says that these things have plummeted and gone down, but somehow It's ridiculous to me to think that the KKK wasn't having rallies prior to Donald Trump being president. Like, come on, you actually think the KKK wasn't holding rallies? You think white supremacist groups weren't having rallies? White nationalist groups weren't having rallies before Trump? During Obama's time, you think they weren't rallying? We just didn't see it. We have to be smart. We have to start thinking about these things. There's a lot of information out there on how the media uses all of this stuff, how the politicians use all of this stuff to get you to vote. They want you to vote. Ultimately, a politician's goal is to stay in office so they can stay getting paid. They paint rich people as the evil folks. Think about all the movies. The evil, you have your hero and then you have his arch nemesis. That arch nemesis is almost always some huge corporate bigwig, some CEO of some company, some owner of some company. There's a reason for that. They're trying to get you to hate the rich folks. And by the way, Republicans, people on the right, and I'm not necessarily Republican, but I'm just saying people on the right are accused of being the party for the rich. However, if you look at it in terms of demographics, you will see that, think about all these Hollywood millionaires. They're almost all liberal. Think about Silicon Valley millionaires. They're almost all liberal. So what is this idea that Republicans are the party of rich folks? It's just not true. It's not based in any facts. They're lying to you. There's a lot of lies. There's a book called Smear you all should read. I forgot the somebody Cheryl Atkinson, I believe. I'll put it in the notes. But these politicians do a lot to try and get you to continue to vote for them, and you have to. I mean, black folks, you'll sit here and you'll say over and over and over how the government has done you wrong, how America has done you wrong, but then you go and you vote for more government. It doesn't make sense. Why would you vote for more government if you believe that the government has been oppressing you? It doesn't make sense. You should have more of a libertarian type of thought process. Freedom. Now, freedom is difficult for a lot of black folks. I understand this, and this is this is something I think about a lot, the idea of freedom. Now, it sounds like I tell people I believe in freedom in the true sense of the word, and people will always agree with me. Black folks will agree. I agree. I believe in freedom until I quiz them. Here's the quiz. If somebody does not want to serve you, now you got to understand, businesses are run by private people. If I am a private individual and I own a business, right? If I own a business, I should be able to hire who I want because it's my business. If I own a bookstore, the books are my property until I sell them, right? Do I not have the freedom to sell my property to whoever I want? If you, okay, say you don't have a business, say you just have something and you want to sell it locally. You have a book or some kind of widget and you want to sell it locally, and you can be discerning about who you sell that to. If you have a pet, for instance, a cat, and I don't like this person, I don't like the way they are, or something like that, whatever the case may be, you can decide who you don't want to sell to. If you walk into a establishment shirtless, they have the right to tell you, I'm not serving shirtless person. Well, if that's the case, and somebody says, hey, I don't want to serve gay folks a cake, and I happen to be homosexual, I'm not, but if I happen to be one, and I walk into a cake store and I want a cake, and they say, well, for my wedding, and they say, no, you can't have this cake, why would I want to give them my money at that point? Why am I going to go get the government to beat them over the head to sell me the cake? Now I'm giving money to people who don't like me. Doesn't make sense. Don't give money to people who don't like you. The free market is a better way to get rid of those people. Because after you find out that they don't sell the cake, you can let everybody else know that they don't sell cakes to this particular type of person, and then people will be properly outraged and they won't go buy cakes from there, and you just find another place that will. That place will get all the money. This place will go out of business. It works perfectly. So, to conclude, I believe that everyone should take a look deep within yourselves and ask yourself the question, is being a victim something that I ought to do? You know, is it something that I ought to hold dear to me, or use as a stepping stone in the ladder of success? I personally believe it's not. I believe that we are absolutely capable of reaching higher heights without having to get government assistance, without having to complain about whatever whites are doing, without having to lean on anyone but ourselves. And that starts by looking within ourselves personally, so as an individual, and not as a group, not as blacks in general. Sure, you can help your fellow man, and I encourage you to do so. However, it starts with you, it starts with me, it starts with all of us. Everyone knows who grew up around me that I wasn't such a good guy as a youth. Through my teenage years, I did a lot of silly things that I probably shouldn't have been doing. But you know, looking within myself, I know that I can do things better. I can be a better person. We all can do the same thing. We all need to look at the government for what the government is. It is really there to protect our freedoms, and not so much there to sick on other people when we don't like what they're doing. I mean, again, we should hold freedom in high regard and hold ourselves to a higher standard. So again, this is the reason why I move from the left to the right. I don't know if that's going to translate from the left to the right on the screen, but I guess it would be left to right. Yeah, I moved from the left to the right, and I think that you know, the right has a right in this regard, and that is to cherish your liberty, cherish your freedom, and don't try and push your own personal things on everyone else. Yes, we want people to rise to these higher standards that we're talking about, but at the same time, we don't want to force them to do anything. You know, it should be about presenting people with good ideas, and hopefully that they will take from those ideas and implement it into their own lives and do well for themselves. That's what we hope. But if there's always like this safety net provided by a government, and it doesn't give people an incentive to do well. So we don't want help. We don't want to be dependent. We want to be independent. Independence is the key to success. It's the key to being responsible. It's the key to teaching others to be responsible. And if we're so dependent on governments, on waiting for whites to not be racist, or waiting for whites to do whatever, we are in for a long trip. And that upward mobility will be stagnated as it is now, because we're waiting for somebody else to make changes rather than making changes ourselves. Anyway, I'm Chi Brown for Considered Culture. And again, the reason I might not have said this before, but the reason I call it Considered Culture is we should consider culture as a part of our problems, more so than we should consider race or any other obstacle. I think we have some cultural issues, and not just black Americans, but America in general has some cultural issues that we need to work on. And if we get those things situated, we'll all be for the better. Peace, love. Signing out.